Through the pruning here in the North Lodge Cottage garden, and the next pruning task up for you today is the pruning of standard, or otherwise known as tree roses. Now, full disclosure, if you wanted to watch a more polished version of this video, there is also already one here for you to watch at any time. You can watch my video on pruning standard or tree roses here on YouTube, on TikTok or on Instagram at your leisure. However, I'm here to recap the basic principles of going through a standard or tree rose now. So you're going to need your standard equipment, you're going to need your normal gloves, you're going to need your secateurs or pruners, as a lot of people like to call them. Mine are the Falco number 8, freshly oiled and sharpened. This particular rose is quite an old one. This one is a standard Wild Eve from David Austin Roses. This one is around 12, 13 years old now. It's getting a little bit unruly. There's a little bit of wood to sort out. So I had actually today grabbed my large loppers because I've been planning this task for several weeks now, and I've also got my large trusty bucket which I take everywhere, because once again you will never find me dropping rose clippings directly onto the ground. I assure you they will get horribly covered in bacteria, and when you're least expecting it, when you're weeding, hoeing or mulching or doing anything else in the garden, they will bite you and cause you nasty infected horrible wounds which you'll have to have sorted out. So always make sure that you cut up your clippings as you work and place them onto a sheet, into a wheelbarrow, or like I do, into a large bucket. The other thing to bear in mind with standard or tree roses is these are long-term investments. These take, for instance, David Austin, an awfully long time to grow, often bringing together 2, sometimes 3 different graft points. In modern times, only 2 graft points are now used. The rootstock is grown up to a certain height before the graft is placed on the top. The union point above ground is the weakest part of the plant that needs to be protected, especially if you are growing in a cold climate. Here in the UK growing zone 7, 8 and 9, we're absolutely fine. We very rarely get temperatures down below about -8, which normally is absolutely fine. If you, however, you're joining me from Canada or from America and your growing zone is 4, 5 or 6 and it is getting much colder, and I know a lot of you have experienced temperatures certainly in the last year that have got down to -18, that's very cold indeed. You do want to make sure that you're looking after your standard or tree roses if you're growing them, and wrap just a little bit of hessian around the graft or union point, or if you wanted to, you can put a hessian bag or some sort of frost fleece over the top, but you must make sure you then support that plant well. Obviously there's an awful lot of stress and an awful lot of weight on a very thin stem. When these things are first delivered, they're normally delivered with a wooden stake, which is about 1 inch, about 2.5 centimeters square, which in my opinion is simply not enough to support a plant like this. I actually replace them immediately at the point of planting with a metal sight pin. You know those hooked metal sight pins you see on the side of the road? You don't see them so much anymore because we don't use temporary fencing like we used to. But back in the 80s, 90s and early noughties, you used to see them everywhere. It gives you the ability to put up temporary fencing. So it's a U-shaped hook and a long cast iron or stainless steel pole which you drive into the ground. They're normally around 3.5 foot high. If you want to get hold of some of them, go to your local builders merchants, the likes of Wicks, who else? Travis Perkins, all of those kind of places will have them for you in bundles of 10. You can also buy them online. So those are sight pins, really good for supporting your standard or tree roses long term. I drive them into the ground next to the plant and using some really strong galvanized wire which I pass through, which you'll see just in a moment, an old piece of domestic watering hose just to stop the wire actually touching the bark. I loop that round in a figure of 8 around the sight pin and support them all the way up, all the stem, all the way up to the graft or the union point. Right, let's get into this. I'm gonna have to set the camera up, so bear with me a second while we move you. Here is today's victim, or willing participant, as you might see. We need to just push the camera forward and you'll see me just come back into the camera in just a moment. So bear with me 1 second while I just get you turned round. Right, that seems to be okay. I'm gonna grab my loppers, I'm going to grab my bucket and I'm going to wade my way into the border, avoiding the snowdrops, which here in the UK have started to come up already. Right, I'm back with you. Right, so as you say, in front of me you've got Wild Eve from David Austin Roses, say about 12, 13 years old now. Really, this principle is exactly the same as if you were pruning a shrub rose at ground level. You're just pruning it above ground on a large stem. The problem with standard or tree roses is they can sometimes get really congested, and I've got a large stem in the center here which has got really old and woody and really unproductive. Today I've been looking at this task for several weeks, and I suggest if you have roses like this, you do the same. I'm a terrible wanderer around the garden. I come home from work, obviously I'm a professional gardener, I come home from work and I wander around the garden, often with a cup of tea just before it gets dark, and I sometimes wander around the garden again before I go off to work, looking like I'm procrastinating and not doing a great deal, but I'm actually planning the tasks ahead. Been looking at this rose for several months now, looking at it thinking, no, this simply won't do. This large stem in the center, which I've favored in the past, really needs to come out. It's now not producing very much new growth. It's become very old and tired, and it's no longer being productive. It's started to die back in places. So today, the first move I'm going to do is open up the center of that plant. Same principle as with the shrub rose. You're looking for dead, diseased and dying wood first, and this particular stem has a large amount of dead wood occurring on the very tip. This is why I've got my loppers today, because I knew I was going to need these. I'm going to get these right into the center of this plant and just remove this large stem. It's in two portions, so I've just removed the first bit, and then the second bit is unfortunately really large indeed. Need to be careful I don't damage anything else. It's a large stem that's taken out right in the middle of the plant, which all of a sudden removed one stem, and all of a sudden the plant becomes a very different animal altogether. Maybe a second while I get hold of this. I don't want to spike myself because I failed to put my gloves on. I've been so busy talking to you. I'm going to bring this close to the camera, and I will at the end of this tutorial pick the camera up and flip it around so you can see what I've been doing. You can see this is the stem in question, was really quite large, almost an inch in diameter, with quite a lot of dieback, and you can see the bark changing colour on this now as well as this stem starts to fade and become less productive. So I'm now going to cut that up into little pieces, get it out of the way, put it into my bucket. Don't often use the loppers in the garden because obviously you've got great big gardening sized paws which normally deal with most things, but there is always a few tasks in the garden where they come in really useful. Now once again, in the middle of the plant I've got this old stem once again that is going really quite dormant, not really doing a great deal. Again, continuing that theme of opening up the center of the plant, removing that stem completely all the way back from whence it came. I'm then going to go over the plant and remove any dead, diseased or dying wood and any of these little scraggly stems as well. These aren't going to have the strength to support any realistically any good growth. There's several of them in the middle of this plant, so I just want to remove those. Really should put my gloves on. I might take a moment in a moment and just do that because I'm going to spike myself. I've got a little bit more dead wood just over here. Please bear in mind, none of this is ever textbook. When standard or tree rose is grafted, David Austin, for instance, grafted a tree rose with 3 sets of buds. You can never really quite tell where they're going to come from. They do it for balance to make sure you get a fairly decent sized canopy and at least 3 different growth points, but they become over time really quite congested, and sometimes like with this one you have to be really quite brutal with them. Now I've removed the dead, the diseased, the dying and that large stem from the centre. It's a much more open and much more manageable plant. A couple of little bits to come out from the middle. Again, looking at those little tiny wispy stems, getting those out of the way. You can see that Wild Eve produces quite long, large, arching growth stems, and I've got a pair of roses, one at one side and one at the other, or this kidney-shaped border. The other one on the other side, incidentally, is Gentle Hermione. These two create a really nice pair, and they're very difficult to tell apart from the shape of the petals. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this one back quite hard. Luckily the growth habit on these two is actually fairly similar. They both like to produce really large wood, and obviously my other shrub roses in the border come up to about my waist height just here, just about sort of here, about 4 foot, and then these tower above them all the way through the summer. So with my secateurs, I'm going to be choosing an outward facing bud. I'm going to be making a 45-degree cut to make sure that the water runs away from the plant, and I'm going to shorten these stems right back, something in the region of about 6 to 8 inches from where they originate on the plant itself. Keeping these stems here, again 45-degree angle cut to make sure that the water runs off, especially important if you're growing in a cold environment. Incidentally, a little technique as well, I should bring a stem close to the camera. Let's shorten this one back. Again, I do this with all of my lives. make sure that you know what I'm doing. We're saying we're making a 45-degree cut, and also incidentally, if we can, selecting an outward facing bud wherever possible. We want to encourage the plant, especially with a standard or tree rose like this. We want it to grow outwards in a really nice, balanced and well structured shape, creating a really, really lovely sort of almost globe on top of the stem. We do that horticulturally by selecting an outward facing bud, which naturally means the plant grows 360 degrees away from the center of the plant, alleviating an awful lot of the pests and disease problems you're going to get with the plant quite naturally, and hopefully alleviating the need to spray and getting rid of black spot mold and mildew. When we're making our cuts, as I say, we're selecting an outward facing bud like this one here. We're making a cut at approximately 35 to 45 degree angle. We are leaving, if we can, well, not if we can, we are leaving 6 to 8 millimeters between the bud and the anvil of the secateurs. What we don't want to do is take this anvil as it bypasses the blade and actually physically crush that bud. So we want to leave a little bit of space there and then simply cut the growth away. You can see there's a little gap there. My anvil and my blade haven't crushed the stem. Nice 45-degree angle, which means the water is going to run off and stop that plant having some dieback issues or any rot. Right, once again, keep yourself tidy. Chop those up into little bits and post them into the bucket. Otherwise, they will come back and bite you at another time. Right, working my way through these stems. Shortening these back now to between 6 and 8 inches from where they came. Nice 45-degree angle cuts. Sometimes you don't get the bud where you want to get the bud. Sometimes it's just the way it happens. Sometimes you have to go with what the plant has actually given you. Very, very rarely a plant will be textbook. I've got several in the garden that I'm really proud of that I can show off with. One of them is a Stacey of Eye, but not everything is always textbook and not everything will be immaculate and absolutely perfect. You can only do your best, and sometimes over a period of time you need to take several years to actually get it to the shape that you want it to. Sometimes for no reason of your own you lose a stem, or you have to take out something really big in the middle of the plant like this, and it sets you back a couple of years and you have to actually come back to it and have a look at it at another point in time. Long stem just over here. This has come together really quite well. I was a bit worried about doing this one because, I say, it looked like it was going to be quite brutal, but it's actually come together quite nicely. And now that I'm doing it, I'm seeing 1 or 2 stems in the centre here that are looking a little untidy. There's an older stem just here, which in my opinion are a little bit congested. So I'm going to completely remove that as well. Once again, opening up the middle of that plant. Don't forget, you can always go back to it and you can always step away from the plant. I strongly advise you do this, especially with a standard or tree rose. You step away from it and you have a look, especially if you've got a line of them or you've got a pair of them like I have here. It's always best to just step away from them. We'll let him go past for a second. Step away from them, give a good walk around them, have a good look and see how you feel. You can always take a little bit more off and make another cut. What you can't do is, if you've already cut it off, you can't go back to it and put it back on. So do make sure that if you have any doubt whatsoever, leave it on for a later point in time and go back to it and have another go. Right, one last stem in the middle here. Where do I cut that one to? I think I'm going to leave that one. See, this is one of the decisions I need to make. I've got 2 stems quite close together here, and they're really quite close. So I've got an outward facing bud on this one, but I've got this one coming through the centre of the plant, which is a nice new healthy stem to replace that one I cut away. For the time being, I'm really happy with the shape there. A little bit higher on this side. I could possibly bring that down just a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the camera, I'm going to pick up the phone. Bear with me 1 second while we do this, and I'll show you exactly how it looks now. So you can always go back to it and take pieces off if you wanted to. Let's flip the camera around so you're not looking at my ugly mug anymore. And there she is. You can see this is the location of that large stem that I took out originally. Had 2 pieces, one growing this way and that larger stem coming all the way through the middle here. I've removed that completely. You can see that over a period of time, this rose is nearly 12 years old. It's got quite congested in the centre here. I've got quite a large amount of bulbous growth. There's not really anything you can do about that. And these are the 2 stems I was talking about just a second ago. Nice outward facing bud coming this way, and this one here with an outward facing bud coming away. But you can see that's created quite a nice round balanced structure. You can see the other standard or tree rose just behind it, which make up a perfect pair. And going back to that original thing we talked about at the start of the video, this is the way I support my standard or tree roses, with a sight pin with a hose pipe wrapped around with some galvanized wire to give them plenty of support. Don't forget, this particular tutorial is available already for you to watch a more polished version if you wanted to watch something that wasn't created on a live stream. is available for you to watch at any time. There is loads more content from me coming over the next few weeks. If you are on Instagram, if you're on TikTok or here on YouTube, you're going to be seeing me prune soft fruits. So things like red currants and black currants are coming up. We are also going to be doing climbing and rambling roses in exactly the same way. You're going to get a pre-filmed video for myself for you to refer back to at any time. You're also going to get a live version of each one, see me working through the process live, which means you get to ask any questions. So bear with me a second while I just catch up with these. Somebody else saying, well, I wish I could use those as cuttings. Yes, I mean, unfortunately, it's a bit difficult at this time of year. You can't really use them as cuttings. The hormone levels and sap levels are wrong. However, I'm not going to advise you not to. If you wanted to give it a go at home and you had success with 1 or 2 pieces, good for you. It's not the time of year to do it. Rose cuttings are normally taken in late August, September into October. Actually, normally, September, October, nearly into November, just as the sap starts to drop. But you can always give it a go. If you've got a couple that you really want to do and you can get hold of some media, I know 1 or 2 of you are really, really keen on getting hold of several of the retired roses, certainly here in the UK. Don't hesitate to ask and give them a go if you wanted to. But yeah, right. That is me all wrapped up. Thank you very much to absolutely everybody that's joined me today. It's been a pleasure talking to you on YouTube. I'm going to go off and do exactly the same thing over and over again on TikTok. I will see you all again very soon. Take good care now. Bye-bye.